It wasn't the storm that woke Evan Weller that night. It was the dead silence that followed. The kind of hush that pressed in too tight, smothering the air like the moments before a siren blared through the city streets. His eyes flickered open, adjusting to the dim light of the master bedroom in their pristine colonial home on the outskirts of Charleston. The city lights shimmered faintly in the distance, but something inside his house felt off. Evan sat up, his pulse steady but cautious. The phone was missing from his bedside table. His wife, Melissa, wasn't beside him. He glanced toward the hallway, half expecting to hear the creak of her familiar step heading for water or a late-night snack. Instead, there was nothing. His gut twisted, a sour pit forming as he rose to his feet. Barefoot, he padded down the hallway. The office door was cracked open. A dim, blue glow spilled out into the dark corridor. Evan leaned in, and what he saw made his breath catch. Melissa, his perfect wife with her Ivy League poise and flawless charm, was on the phone, her back to the door. She was whispering, her shoulders tense. "No, he's asleep. You can't call me now. Someone might see us." Her voice was soft but urgent, a dagger wrapped in silk. Evan's pulse thundered in his ears as he watched her words slice through the calm of the night. He thought of their life, their picture-perfect marriage, the charity galas, the weekend trips to the Hamptons, their long walks along Folly Beach. All of it felt like a crumbling facade. Melissa hung up and exhaled shakily, completely unaware that Evan stood just feet away. Her phone screen flashed briefly with a name before it faded to black. Mayor Clayton Harding. The realization hit like a slap across the face. He stepped into the room, his shadow sweeping over the threshold like a noose tightening. Melissa turned and gasped, the blood draining from her face as she clutched the phone to her chest. "Evan," she whispered, but the damage was done. "Who was that?" he asked, his voice low and sharp, cutting through her attempt at calm. Melissa hesitated, her lips parting but failing to form words. The silence between them expanded, pregnant with lies yet to be spoken. Evan's fists clenched, his world spiraling into questions he wasn't sure he wanted answers to. "Melissa." He took another step forward, his gaze unrelenting. "Who the hell was that?" Tears glistened in her eyes, but not the kind born of remorse. They were tears of fear. Fear of being caught. The first crack had appeared in their perfect life, and Evan could feel it splintering beneath their feet. And though Melissa didn't know it yet, she had ignited something in him. Something cold, calculating, and far more dangerous than heartbreak. Evan wasn't the kind of man to crumble. No, if his world was burning, he'd make sure she felt the flames too. The storm outside had returned, fierce and relentless, but it couldn't hold a candle to the one brewing inside that house. "We're not done here," Evan muttered, his eyes dark as coal. As Melissa's knees nearly buckled under the weight of his stare, Evan turned on his heel and walked away, because this story, their story, was just getting started. The following morning dawned quiet, but thick with unspoken tension. The golden sunlight streaming through the windows did little to chase away the heavy shadows clinging to Evan's thoughts. He sat at the breakfast table, staring at a steaming cup of black coffee he had no intention of drinking. The smell of fresh eggs wafted through the air, but even that felt out of place, like an attempt at normalcy in a world that had just tilted off its axis. Melissa was in the kitchen, methodically slicing strawberries, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail as if everything was perfectly ordinary. She wore the same effortless grace that had once made him fall for her, the polished, serene facade she wielded so easily. But this morning, that grace felt like armor. Evan watched her closely, his thoughts running in jagged circles. The mayor, he thought grimly. It wasn't just the affair itself that clawed at him. It was the magnitude of the betrayal. Clayton Harding wasn't just a public figure. He was a man who wielded power and influence, a polished giant in their city of well-manicured facades. Melissa hadn't just crossed a line. She had detonated it. Melissa turned and caught him staring. Her smile was forced, as delicate as the glass plates they ate from. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice light yet probing. Evan's response was a long, measured silence. Finally, he set the coffee mug down with a hollow clink. I couldn't sleep last night. Her face twitched, a small betrayal of nerves before she quickly recovered. Me either. The storm was awful. Evan's lips curled into a humorless smile. Yeah, the storm. She blinked and turned away, busying herself with arranging the fruit on their plates. Evan felt a surge of something dark rising in him, something that begged to know every sordid detail. How long have you known Harding? Evan's voice cut through the morning calm like a razor. Melissa froze, her back still to him. The knife hovered over the cutting board as if she didn't trust her hands to stay steady. He's the mayor, Evan. Everyone knows him. He leaned forward, his elbows pressing into the table as his heart pounded in his chest. That's not what I asked. She turned around slowly, eyes wary. What are you trying to say? Evan didn't answer. He let the silence speak for him, thick and accusatory. She stared back at him, eyes wide and shimmering. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, he interrupted, his voice low but lethal. I saw you, Melissa. I heard you. Melissa's face crumpled for a split second before she tried to piece it back together. It's complicated, she whispered. Evan's laugh was bitter and sharp. Oh, I'm sure it is. Melissa stepped closer, as though proximity could erase the widening chasm between them. Please, Evan. I never wanted you to find out this way. But you did it anyway, he snapped. He felt his control slipping like a rope burning through his hands. Why him, Melissa? Why someone like Harding? Tears spilled down her cheeks. It wasn't supposed to be. She covered her face with her hands, her voice cracking. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Evan's fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to grab something, throw it, break it, anything to shatter the unbearable weight pressing against his chest. But he didn't. Instead, he stood and walked past her, toward the front door. Where are you going? She called after him, panic rising in her voice. He paused at the door, one hand gripping the frame. To clear my head, he muttered without looking back. The door clicked shut behind him. Outside, the morning air was brisk but bright. Evan took a deep breath, but the betrayal stuck to his lungs like tar. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his daze. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A text from his friend, Noah Langston. Brunch at Astor's? Heard Harding's speech was a mess last night. Drama in paradise? Evan's jaw tightened as he reread the message. Drama, indeed. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and walked toward his car, his mind already turning over possibilities he hadn't dared consider before. If Melissa thought she could control this narrative, she was wrong. This was his story now, and Evan Weller was no longer playing the role of the devoted husband. He was ready to rewrite everything. Evan drove aimlessly through the streets of Charleston, the old city looming around him with its elegant iron balconies and stately homes. But today, its beauty felt hollow, like a gilded painting concealing decay beneath. The ache in his chest was no longer just heartbreak. It was fury and obsession, a desperate need for answers. His mind played back every detail he could remember. Melissa's hushed voice, her hesitation, and that name flashing on her phone, Clayton Harding. The mayor wasn't just a distant name or figurehead. Harding was a constant presence in their lives, at charity galas, city fundraisers, and private dinners where he laughed too loudly and charmed everyone in the room. Evan had never liked him. The man's charisma felt too polished, too performative. But it wasn't suspicion that kept Evan wary of him. It was instinct. After what felt like hours, Evan's car slowed as he found himself parked outside an unassuming cafe. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions, a far cry from their usual upscale haunts. He took a seat at a secluded corner table, his thoughts whirring as he sipped a bitter espresso. He needed someone who could confirm what he already suspected. His phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Noah. It was a message from a former acquaintance, a private investigator named Marcus Hale. Marcus, we need to meet in person. The Harding thing is bigger than you think. Evan stared at the screen, a chill running down his spine. Marcus wasn't the type to exaggerate. They'd crossed paths years ago when Marcus helped a mutual friend uncover fraud, and Evan never forgot the man's knack for uncovering the ugliest truths hidden in plain sight. He typed back quickly, I'll be there. Send the location. By the time evening fell, Evan found himself sitting across from Marcus in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town. Marcus was a wiry man with sharp eyes and a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow. He slid a worn folder across the table. Harding's made enemies, Marcus began, his voice gravelly. A lot of them. I've been watching him for months. Off the books. I didn't think you'd come asking about him. Evan opened the folder and felt the floor drop out from under him. Photos of Melissa and Harding. Meeting at private restaurants, sitting too close during events, and worse, a grainy image of them disappearing into a luxury hotel. His stomach twisted, and his knuckles whitened as he clenched the edge of the folder. Marcus sighed. You need to be smart about this. Harding doesn't just play politics, he plays people. He's got the press in his pocket and half the city council under his thumb. If you go after him the wrong way, you'll be the one who ends up ruined. Evan's voice was low, deadly. I'm not scared of him. Marcus leaned forward. You should be. Men like him don't just protect their reputation. They destroy anyone who threatens it. Evan's mind buzzed as Marcus's words sank in. But fear wasn't what fueled him. It was the sickening realization that Melissa hadn't just betrayed him. She'd let herself be pulled into something corrupt and dangerous. As Evan drove home later that night, the city lights blurred in his vision. His mind was already spinning with a plan. A way to expose them both without getting caught in the fallout. Melissa might have believed her affair was a secret, but secrets had a way of unraveling when the right thread was pulled. When he stepped back into the house, the scent of dinner filled the air. Melissa was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of soup. She turned when she heard the door close, offering a tentative smile. You're back, she said softly. Evan nodded, hanging his coat on the rack. He stared at her for a long moment, memorizing the way she moved, the way she acted like everything was normal. Yeah, he said, his tone unreadable. I'm back. Melissa's smile faltered. She could sense something different but didn't dare ask. Evan's mask was firmly in place now. He sat down at the table, watching as she served the soup. The silence between them was as thick as the steam rising from their bowls. But in Evan's mind, everything was moving at lightning speed. By the time they cleared the dishes, he had already decided how this story would end. The mayor might have thought he was untouchable, and Melissa might have believed her lies were safe. But Evan was done playing the fool. Tomorrow, he'd begin pulling the threads, and he'd make sure the world saw the truth, even if it meant watching everything they built come crashing down. The following morning, the air was thick with humidity and tension. Evan woke early, his thoughts tangled but focused. He had spent the night crafting a plan, one that would force the truth into the light. Today wasn't about quiet suffering or unanswered questions. It was about control. Melissa was still asleep when he slipped out of the bedroom and into his office. He opened his laptop, pulling up the encrypted folder Marcus had sent him. The damning evidence, photographs, timestamps, and more, glared back at him. He had everything he needed to bring their empire of lies to its knees. By mid-morning, Evan was standing outside Clayton Harding's municipal office downtown. The pristine glass facade gleamed in the sunlight, reflecting the busy city streets. Harding's smiling portrait hung in the lobby, a symbol of the mayor's influence and charm. But all Evan saw was a man who had stolen everything sacred. Can I help you? The receptionist asked with a polite smile. Evan returned her smile, though his was colder. I'm here to see the mayor. Tell him Evan Weller's here. The receptionist blinked. Do you have an appointment? Trust me, he'll want to see me. The receptionist hesitated, but then made a quick phone call. Within moments, the elevator doors opened, and Harding's assistant waved Evan in. The mayor's office was spacious and tastefully decorated with framed accolades and bookshelves stacked with leather-bound editions. Harding rose from behind his desk, his politician's smile firmly in place. Evan, he greeted, his voice warm but wary. This is a surprise. Evan stepped forward, his movements controlled but purposeful. Cut the act. We both know why I'm here. Harding's smile faltered. He gestured for Evan to sit, but Evan remained standing. I trusted you, Evan said, his voice low but laced with venom. You sat at my table. You spoke to my wife in front of me, knowing full well what was happening behind my back. Harding's face hardened. This isn't the place for. You're damn right it's not, Evan snapped. But I'm not here for small talk. I'm here to make sure you understand what's about to happen. Evan reached into his coat and pulled out a manila envelope, tossing it onto the desk. The photos spilled out, grainy but damning. Harding's face paled as he sifted through the evidence. This is blackmail, Harding muttered. No, Evan corrected. This is justice. Harding's eyes flickered with panic before narrowing. You won't win. Men like me don't fall because of a few photos. Evan smiled. A chilling, joyless thing. It's not just photos. It's hotel logs, private accounts, and more. And if I have it, imagine what your enemies could do with it. Harding's bravado cracked. For the first time, he looked genuinely unsettled. I don't want to destroy your career, Harding, Evan continued. But I will. And when I do, it won't just be headlines. It'll be everything. Your reputation, your legacy, everything you built. There was a long silence as Harding stared at the photos. Finally, he looked up, his voice brittle. What do you want? Evan's expression darkened. Stay away from Melissa. Resign quietly, or I'll make sure this city knows exactly who you are. By the time Evan left the office, the weight on his chest had lifted slightly, but he knew the hardest part was still ahead. He wasn't finished. When he returned home that evening, Melissa was sitting in the living room, staring blankly at a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up when he entered, her face pale and drawn. We need to talk, Evan said, his voice steady. Melissa nodded slowly, setting the glass down. I know. He sat across from her, his eyes never leaving hers. How long? She swallowed hard. Almost a year. The words hung in the air like a noose. Why? He asked, his voice breaking for the first time. Tears welled in Melissa's eyes. I don't know. I was stupid. I was scared. Of losing everything. Of feeling invisible. Evan leaned back, his face unreadable. You weren't invisible to me. Melissa broke down then, sobbing into her hands. But Evan felt hollow. Her tears couldn't wash away the betrayal. I gave Harding a choice, Evan said after a long silence. He's stepping down. Melissa's head snapped up, eyes wide. What did you do? I exposed him. Or rather, I gave him a chance to expose himself. Evan's voice was calm, but there was a storm behind his words. And you? You'll live with what you've done. You'll watch your perfect world collapse. I'm done protecting you. Melissa's sobs quieted, replaced by a stunned silence. She looked shattered, like the pieces of her carefully curated life were slipping through her fingers. Evan stood and walked to the door. I'm leaving for a while, he said. When I come back, we'll figure out the paperwork. Evan, please. He shook his head. We're done. The door closed behind him, leaving Melissa alone in the dim room, surrounded by the echoes of her own ruin. Weeks passed like a slow, unraveling thread. The news of Mayor Clayton Harding's sudden resignation sent shockwaves through Charleston's political elite. No one knew the full story, only that a quiet scandal had forced the once unbreakable figure to bow out in disgrace. Whispers filled the city's cocktail lounges and private gatherings, but the truth was buried beneath veils of speculation. For Melissa, life became a hollow imitation of what it had once been. The luxury, the social calendar, the attention, none of it mattered anymore. Evan had been the cornerstone of her world, and now he was gone. She stayed in their home, wandering through its empty rooms, haunted by memories of what she'd lost. Invitations from friends stopped coming. Sympathy turned into whispers behind her back. The beautiful, confident woman who had once commanded the room now sat in the shadows, broken. Evan's journey, however, was different. He had taken a flight to the quiet forests of Colorado, staying in a remote cabin surrounded by mountains and silence. The vast wilderness was a balm for his battered heart, a place where the constant noise of betrayal could fade away. Each morning, he watched the sunrise over the peaks, letting the cold air remind him that he was still alive. No more lies. No more masks. One evening, Evan sat by the cabin's fireplace, a glass of bourbon in hand. His phone, untouched for days, lit up with a notification. It was from Noah Langston. Noah, Harding's done. The city's already moving on. You good? Evan stared at the message for a long moment before finally replying. Evan, yeah, I'm good. He wasn't sure if it was entirely true, but it felt close enough. Back in Charleston, the final blow to Melissa came quietly but painfully. Her phone rang one afternoon, an unfamiliar number. She hesitated before answering. Melissa Weller, a voice asked. Yes. This is the Harding legal office. We wanted to inform you that Mr. Harding has filed an affidavit in which he has disclosed his resignation as a result of a consensual affair. He has chosen to admit his actions to preempt further investigation. We will be making an official public statement tomorrow. Melissa's breath caught in her throat. The words were a death knell. Harding had thrown her name to the wolves to salvage what little he could of his reputation. By the next day, the media storm descended. While the official statement avoided naming her directly, the truth spread like wildfire. She became a cautionary tale in Charleston's social circles, a symbol of betrayal and downfall. Months later, Evan returned to Charleston. His time away had transformed him. His shoulders broader, his face weathered but resolute. He no longer carried the burden of bitterness. Instead, he was determined to rebuild. He resumed work with quiet determination, investing his time in new projects and rediscovering his passions. Friends and colleagues noticed the change. Evan Weller wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. One afternoon, as he walked along the familiar paths of Folly Beach, he passed a small cafe where he and Melissa had once shared carefree mornings. The memory tugged at him, but didn't anchor him in sadness. He ordered a coffee and sat outside, watching the waves. A woman sitting nearby noticed his contemplative expression and smiled politely. Beautiful day, isn't it? Evan nodded. Yeah, it is. The world had changed, and so had he. Melissa, on the other hand, faded into obscurity. The city that had once admired her turned its back. She sold their home, retreating to a smaller house far from the glitzy neighborhoods where she had once reigned. Alone and haunted by her choices, she watched from a distance as Evan's life blossomed without her. Evan never sought vengeance in the form of destruction. His revenge was in his survival and growth, while Melissa's punishment was the slow decay of everything she had tried to protect. She had built her life on lies, and now she lived among their ruins. And as the sun set over Charleston, Evan knew one thing for certain. He had walked through the fire and come out stronger. Melissa's choices had burned their shared life to ashes. But from those ashes, he had built something new, something unbreakable.